So let's maybe move on to Anders Nilsson, who asks two questions. Number one, when comparing famous speaker brands, are there some general differences between them that you could describe in the way you perceive their sound and character? And two, which qualities can you expect to experience when listening to more expensive speakers in comparison to budget speakers?
So Klipsch loudspeakers are generally known for being extremely dynamic sounding. So exciting, fun to listen to. And they're almost, I wouldn't say they're entirely out on their own, because JBL kind of go that way, and there's a company called Zoo in Utah that go that way as well. But that is drawn from a line of thinking that started with big kind of, I guess the big Altex, the big movie theater speakers in the 30s and maybe beforehand in the 20s. So high efficiency designs generally. So that is kind of one thing. If somebody said to me, like, I want a really, or no, not really, but an easier to drive loudspeaker, and I want it to be exciting, I would say look at Zoo, Klipsch and JBL. Then there are like the kind of sort of more like a Dynaudio type speaker, which is maybe an 85, I'm talking about passives here, so maybe your audience might not be tuned into this too much, but 85 dB two-way stand mount, which won't have a lot of low end and might sound extremely clean, what I call squeegee clean. So maybe closer to the the monitors that you guys use and I can see here. But they're generally more matter of fact. So a Klipsch speaker, many people would say, oh, it sounds a bit aggro in that presence region. And I wouldn't disagree, but the thing is, those speakers have changed over the years, and that behavior has been tamed somewhat in the last 5 years. So if you think Klipsch speakers sound really aggro, you might want to go and listen to a modern pair just to update your thinking. And then, I mean, Bowers and Wilkins have a range of speakers with a tweeter that sits in its own sort of container on top of the speaker. And a lot of hi-fi people would say, well, that is a very incisive, I'm being polite here, a very incisive tweeter. Some people might say it's bright, other people might go, that's perfect. And a lot of it will depend upon the amplifiers you use to drive those speakers, in fact, probably entirely. But generally speaking, if you want a kind of a livelier top end, an area sounding speaker, you might want to go for a Bowers and Wilkins. If you want something that images nicely on a desktop, maybe a Kef, because it's got the coaxial driver. So there are sort of rough directions you can go in for certain types of sound based upon brand. And the second part of this question was like, okay, what qualities do more expensive speakers give you that more affordable speakers don't? Well, number one is clarity. Like how, it's almost, I know this is a cliche, but like cleaning the window, like how much further you can see and literally see into the recording, and then how clean the bass will be. Generally, like more expensive speakers handle bass a bit better, but if you're running a 2.1, is that relevant? I don't really know. But I think it might be to do with like a lower distortion that more expensive speakers give you. But again, it could come down to driver type, crossover components and implementation. There's so many variables that you can't look at one thing and go, oh, that's got that, so it's going to sound like that. No, not really. But I think the problem is with kind of considering very expensive speakers is that I think you're throwing your money away if you don't have a treated room. Completely. Like if I generally sort of top out my speaker choices at say 10, 15 grand. I know that's mega money for a lot of people, and it is mega money. I'm not going to be glib about it. But now I have a treated room, I might be tempted to go higher, but I don't really find a lot of joy personally in really expensive speakers sounding great, because I'm thinking, well, they bloody well should do, because they cost all this money. The joy is in finding something that sounds terrific for less money. That doesn't mean that the more affordable item sounds as good as the more expensive item. That's where people tend to get tripped up. But
there's somehow a bigger satisfaction.
Well, yeah, because it's almost like feeling like you've cheated the system, or feeling like the speaker engineer has cheated the system a little bit. But
it's kind of, you kind of always want the best bang for the buck, right? It's like,
yeah, but best bang for buck is, I don't know, like I used to think it was, literally all in, well, actually, I used to think it was all in the DAC, but it's not.
It's all in the DAC.
All in the DAC, no.
We should print that on a t-shirt.
Because DSP crossover design has come so far in even the last 5 years, let alone 10 years. So active loudspeakers are extremely potent nowadays. Extremely. But hi-fi people will go, well, no, I want to choose my amplifier and I want to choose my DAC. But then they're playing the mix and match game. Now, for some people, that's fun. And if you can afford it, fill your boots, because that is a lot of fun. Try this, try that. But if you're on a tight budget and you're trying to maximize your bang for your buck, you don't want to be dancing around trying to find which amplifier is best for these speakers, because that just seems like insanity. That's like saying, what's the best wheel for this car? It's like, I don't know. Like, you're going to try them all, right? So there might be some good scientific reasons why that amp sounds great with those speakers, but it's hard to know, isn't it? Because the majority of hi-fi components are measured in isolation. So that doesn't factor in like what that amp would do with that speaker load. And if that speaker load is copacetic with the amplifier, you might get an amazing result, better than expected. But no measurement's going to tell you that, because they measure the speaker in isolation, the amp in isolation, and you would be the smartest audiophile on the planet if you could look at those specs and go, well, that's going to give you this, 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 and this. No. So it's like the integration, right, because hi-fi people are into separate.
The emergent properties of the system.
Yes. So it's the system that, you're listening to, obviously, but that's not what people are measuring when they're measuring things, right? So this is why I'm a big fan of active speakers, because the amps are fit to the drivers, right, and directly coupled to the drivers, and only have to do a limited bandwidth. They don't have to do the full range. I realise that, yes, once, if your amp dies, your whole speakers have to go back and get repaired. But if your amp dies with a passive speaker system, you still have no sound. You still got to get the amp repaired. I don't buy that argument necessarily. So, I'm sorry, I wandered off track there.
That's fine. That's fine.
Just little hobby horse topics.
Pete Watson says, I'd be very interested to know what tonal influences different materials, i.e. wood, aluminium, etc. make in the construction of speaker cabinets. We hear big differences between wood and acoustic guitars. Is that difference as big in cabinet materials?
This is way beyond my area of expertise, but I will add this, is that there's a chap who makes and designs loudspeakers in the UK. He's done a bunch of Wharfdale and Mission stuff in the last few years. And he was telling me, was it last year or the year before, that the company, I think it was Mission actually, when he designed a pair of speakers for Mission, that he went through a lot of trial and error with different mixtures of, I think, plywood and MDF, and even the glue that attaches those two layers together can influence the sound of the speaker. So yes, obviously this has a major impact. I mean, if you want the most inert speaker, you might think that making a speaker out of concrete would be a good idea. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. Otherwise, we'd have seen quite a lot of concrete speakers already. So I think, it's when a loudspeaker engineer tackles a speaker design, they'll be given a bill of materials price. They'll have to come in at like under 800 or under 1500. So that tells them they're going to have to choose a compromise somewhere. So it might be in the cabinet design, the size, the materials, the internal bracing. So internal bracing, I think, is far more prevalent now than it used to be. I think maybe back in the 60s, a lot of speakers were the box and then a bunch of wadding, the kind of, what would you call it? The material goes inside, and that's it. But since then, speaker engineers have learned that, putting a brace between the two sides stops the prevents some of the resonant behavior of the side panels. So they go about it that way. But again, there's no I've seen glass speakers. If that was the perfect material, why haven't we all moved to glass speakers? So I think a lot of it is also aesthetics. I mean, I guess the most common speaker material is MDF.
I'm sure, yeah.
Without a doubt, right? Yeah. So that might be the best compromise in terms of value for money to hit that bill of materials cost that you're trying to aim for. Yeah. So if you're looking at a speaker that's made from some exotic material, don't necessarily think that that's going to give you nirvana over and above an MDF design, but that goes both ways, so yeah.
Good answer. Boris Boyko asks, how do you tell one speaker is better than another? How do you choose the right speaker, especially in the higher price range where you have enough money to actually build a good speaker? Let me give you an example. I've had the Key 3, I guess, Genelec 8351 side by side, and I preferred the Genelecs. Is there a way to close your eyes and say, yes, this speaker is actually better? Because both are good, in quotation marks, speakers, right?
Yes, and I still have my Genelecs. I don't have my Keys anymore, mainly because of a space factor, because the stands are big. I just had nowhere to put them. But the Genelecs are up on a shelf and I've hardly listened to them. But they are both great speakers. I would say that the Key is it's a bigger sounding speaker. It's more physical. I would be more inclined to put the Genelecs on a desk because they're the coax design. So the sound image will coalesce sooner. So they might be better in the near field. I would imagine they were designed for the near field anyway. But those things are pretty brutal in terms of, I don't want to say honesty, but they don't make music sound beautiful. So the thing is this is a personal thing, right? I think all hi-fi speakers are coloured. I think all
speakers are
colored.
period.
They're coloured. It's just you just gotta.
They have a colour.
They have a colour, and it's subtle gradations, right? So you just have to. It sounds like a cop-out, so you got to pick the one that you like. I mean, if you want more bass, you probably go for a Key. But if you want, say, like a more insightful mid-range, you might like the Genelec more. Again, a lot of it will come down to your room's acoustics, because the Key 3 and their cardioid dispersion make them great for tighter spaces or where you can't have acoustic treatments in place. Whereas the Genelecs also have that, is it called SAM? The room correction software that you could use that to help solve some of your bass problems. I mean, yeah, if somebody says to me, I like the Genelecs more than the Key, I'll be like, yeah, cool. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to find that to be the case.
I made the disclaimer in the intro that a lot of or at least some of the answers your people are going to get are going to be pretty vague, because a lot of it is going to come down to taste, and it's a complex subject. And I'm saying now that also testing speakers, as in doing listening tests with speakers that are actually objective, is close to impossible. And so, unfortunately, in this case, the best answer you probably can give is it's the one that you're going to like most, that you're going to enjoy. Yeah.
All right, let me ask you a question. Right,
sure.
In the mixing engineer world, right, you're obviously using active loudspeakers more often than not. What's the number one speaker that most mixing engineers are using
right now? I think at the high end, it's going to be something like ATCs. They're very, very popular. Obviously, our NS10s never fully went away.
But is there one definitive speaker?
No.
There isn't, is there?
No.
It's the same in the hi-fi world.
Yeah, the Amphion are really, really highly regarded.
Right. Yeah. But why isn't there a definitive speaker?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's because it in many cases, in a lot of cases, it comes down to taste. Yeah, because you have to like the particular color of the speaker that you're working on, and it's a pure taste thing. It's a gut thing. And if you like the color, if you are intuitively driven or attracted by that color, if your taste mimics what this color gives you, then you will gravitate naturally towards that in your work while you're working. And that will automatically lead to better translating work, better translating mixes. And if you're fighting the color, the natural color, the style of the speaker with your taste, then you're gonna have a hard day. Like it's gonna be hard. So
sure, but
that's why.
I mean, here's something to think about, and this isn't my original thought. This credit goes to Steve Guttenberg, who's also a hi-fi YouTuber, and he once said, "It's an amazing point, right? You would think that as budget constraints fall away, so as loudspeakers get more expensive, that they would converge to some ideal, whether it's an accurate ideal or whatever it is, right? But you go and listen to like a range of, say, 50 grand passive loudspeakers, they all sound vastly different.
Yeah.
So then the question is like, well, which one of these is closest to neutral?
Yeah.
You can't know.
Yeah.
You can't possibly know. People love to say, "Oh, I got this speaker because it's the most neutral." You think you're thinking that, but actually, you're just saying this was just most.
Either to me most.
Yes, appeal to me most, or communicated a sense of what I think is what neutrality would sound like,
exactly
right?
Yeah.
And it's an illusion, and again, it's behavioral psychology, and I think it's fascinating because I've been to Stefan Bedke's studio here. He's got some big ATCs, and they sound phenomenal. But does that make him a better mixing or mastering engineer than somebody working on a pair of Adams? Maybe not. I guess it depends upon your ear. Again, the room. I mean, he's got a beautifully treated room, but it's about the same size as this one.
I mean, let me throw this kind of analogy or metaphor into the room when it comes to high end versus budget speakers. In terms of for mixing engineers, what I found is that the higher up the spectrum you go, the higher up in price you go, the larger the difference is between small details. Like imagine the kind of the scale of what you're hearing, the differences between two impressions are kind of on a rubber band. Yeah. And so with a cheap speaker, that rubber band is just contracted and they're, let's say, just like half an inch apart, these two spots. Now, if you increase the price of your speaker, you're basically stretching that rubber band. So you're still getting the same amount of information, but those 2 points, which were about half an inch apart, are now 2 inches apart because you stretched that rubber band. And so it's easier to see, or in this analogy, hear the difference between these two impressions because they are further apart in terms of the impression that what you're given from a hearing impression. And that makes it easier to discern differences between these 2 points on the rubber band, right? And so it makes it easier to work. It makes it with the same amount of effort. It's easier to hear the difference because there's a higher resolution in a way. You can fine tune to a higher degree of detail because it's so much easier to hear, and that gives you the ability to just take the work that you do, that extra 10-20% in terms of quality, right? And so that's how I kind of see the worth of high quality, more expensive speakers. It gives you the ability to work easier, or it makes your life easier, and you get to actually discern detail to a higher precision, to a higher degree of precision. And that's where ATCs, for example, come in with their mid-range driver, as far as I know. That's why some mastering engineers really like those, because at the very, very top end of the music industry and the highest quality of music, you want your mastering engineer to be able to discern to that amount of detail what little changes he might need to make on a broad spectrum of things to really fine-tune the end result. And that's what you can only get with a really high-end speaker, and it'll be much more difficult with a low-end speaker.
I think what you're talking about
given the same room.
Yeah, what you're talking about there, I think I would call layer separation and how distinct it is. Right? And yeah, you're right. In more affordable speakers, generally, stuff becomes more of a mush.
That's right. Yeah.
And as you kind of go up the food chain, it gets pulled apart more cleanly. And the stuff that you talk about there in terms of like a mixing engineer being able to do his job or a mastering engineer being able to do his job, I think is also the same shit that audiophiles get the kick out of. Like they love being able to hear the pull apart stuff. But to come back to my Steve Guttenberg point, I've got 2 pairs of speakers, right? I've got a pair of Vivid Kaya S12. They're like an orange, well, in my case, they're orange. They look like a Barber Papa. They're a 2-way stand mount. Very detailed, very airy, not a lot of low end. I think they need a sub. The manufacturer disagrees with me, but I still stand by this, right? 6 or so grand, maybe 7 grand. And yet equally the same money could go into a pair of Klipsch Forte 4, which I have as well. They're nowhere near as refined. They're more dynamic. They're more exciting. They go much lower in the bass. Which is the best of these 2 speakers? Like, according to whom? According to whose tastes? It depends on whether you want dynamics and low end, or whether you want a more refined, finessed, more sort of beard strokey kind of kind of presentation. Because some people do want that, and some people just want the rock and roll experience. So yeah, there are certain qualities, I guess, that are common to the majority of good sounding loudspeakers. But I would say this is, I think most loudspeaker designers have got that nailed already, because nowadays with the speed of information movement with the internet, a loudspeaker that's poorly designed won't even get a start in the market. It'll be gone. Yeah. People just ignore it and go, well, this is crap. Yeah. So generally most of the stuff that comes my way is already pretty good
in its price range.
Yeah. A lot of people don't want to admit that, because they want to think that there is shit stuff out there, so that they could, almost like they've got some kind of boogeyman to kind of combat. I guess it's like what we spoke about recently. But it's just, there are certain qualities that might not be common to all speakers, which are great, right? Like dynamics. You don't find high dynamics in every loudspeaker selling for $8,000, but you do on a Klipsch. You don't find a nice airy sound from a Klipsch, but you get it on the Vivid Kaya S12. So those designers have picked their poisons.
That's right.
They're both great listening experiences, but they're just different, right? It's like saying, which is the best country, Spain or France?
Yeah.
Well,
I prefer Spanish food or Italian food.
Well, it's just it's the food, it's everything. It's all, the people, the architecture, the climate that influences that architecture, right? It's just, at some point you're asking a nonsense question. Yeah. I really think this. I mean, people say to me, "Oh yeah, like studio speakers, they're too analytical for my listening room." And I kind of know what people are driving at, because I've had some head speakers in my listening room, and they're not this sort of like coloured Klipsch exciting sound. They're very focused on, I think, on clarity. I think that's the main driving force behind the design. How much exposure can we give the listener to what's going on sort of deeper in the mix, rather than are we going to excite the listener? So maybe that is common to a lot of studio speakers, like the Genelecs, like the Key 3s, and also like the Dutch and Dutch. But when you get into like, okay, I can parametrically adjust the response of a Dutch and Dutch, well, what kind of speaker is it then? Is it a bass heavy speaker? Yes. Is it a bass light speaker? Yes. You can have what you want, right? And it's the same with the Key. You can EQ that as well. That's why I like a lot of these sort of modern actives, because EQ can take you in certain directions. You can't EQ one speaker to sound like another, but you can push it in certain directions. I think that's cool. But again, it's like salt and pepper, isn't it? You're flavoring to taste.
That's why I keep talking about taste. Yeah.
Right.
Excellent. I think. Yeah. Let's move on. Everett Schutt asks, I'm not a professional audio engineer, so I can't afford anything above, let's say, 1,200 euros a pair. Anyway, I just bought a new pair recently. Am I a hopeless case, or is it still worthwhile to record and mix audio? I mean, what do you really need? I guess in a shorter way, is 1,200 euros enough for a speaker pair that allows you to record and mix audio properly?
Well, I would hope so. Yeah, I would think so. But then when you go to something better, you'll probably become better. But it's not just about the speaker, is it? Because it's about your skills as a mixing engineer, I guess in this case, or in my case, your skills as a listener. It takes time to appreciate the things that you should be listening for. I'm not even there yet, and I'm still learning stuff that I should be listening for. And it's taken me, I don't know, well, professionally, like 15 years, but I've been listening all my life. But I guess it's like, how there's the sommeliers who can locate a wine from just a sip, right? They can tell you with the region, the year, the vineyard, right? They have honed their senses to a point that they know exactly what to look for. And I think that's the same with like listeners like me or mixing engineers. It takes time, and you'll make mistakes along the way. But I think if you start with a pair of Key 3s, you're very fortunate and you can be mixing wonderfully. But if you're a shit mixing engineer or mastering engineer, those Key 3s are not going to save you. They're just not. Like it's you. So if you say, well, am I a lost cause? I don't know, because I don't know how good you are as a mixing engineer. And I wouldn't be able to judge it anyway. But
yeah, totally. I mean, let's kind of take use the analogy of the carpenter with the hammer, right? I mean, you got to get a hammer where the top doesn't fly off the first time you swing it, you know? And a good hammer will have like a good weight balance if you hold it in your hand.
Right.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you need to actually learn how to use the hammer properly.
Yeah, and that's a skill, isn't it?
And so there's a kind of once you've gotten a hammer that actually stays together when you swing it and the weight balance is good, then you can start working on just learning how to use the hammer.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's the same with speakers, right? So €100 speaker, you're going to have a tough time learning how to mix. But once you've invested, let's say €1,200, 600 per speaker, that's probably a good enough hammer to move on to learning how to actually hit the nail on the head, you know?
See, I would say if you're at that point, €1,200, then you're thinking, okay, what's my next speaker? I'll be like, stop.
Now you need to invest 3 to 5 times as much in your...
Yeah, you got to think about the room, because it's not your speaker that's holding you back anymore.
No, not at
It'll be the room, assuming you have an untreated room.
Yeah. Colin Benfield says, always wondered if do you, John, have a more pleasurable listening experience with acoustic corrections with room panels or using digital software correction?
Well, I guess what has given me the most dramatic change is the acoustic panels, by far, apart from in the low end, because I haven't really treated the low end in my room. And I know I should have done it this way, your way, with bass traps all around. But I didn't want to commit to that amount of volume, so I just went for the mid-range and above. And that is great, but I still have a bass problem. So how do I tackle that? Well, I tackle that sometimes, but not always, with DSP. So with the room correction software. So the two work hand in hand.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Ben asks, is there a way to determine what the best size speakers you should get are based on the size of the room that you're mixing in?
It's a thorny one, isn't it? Because you would think, and I think a lot of people think this, that small room means small speakers. But some speaker engineer did try and explain it to me a few years ago, that isn't necessarily the case. And it depends upon the width of the front baffle and also how loud you're going to listen. But I mean, this is where I kind of, my technical understanding reaches its limit. But I've heard small speakers trigger my room more than, say, a bigger speaker ever would. And I don't know why. And maybe it's the baff width, maybe it's the port location being on the back. But it's just such a weird phenomenon. Whereas the Klipsch speakers that I spoke about, the Forte 4, I seem to be able to put those in, even in my Berlin room, and they sound great. And that's not a massive room, but they sound fantastic. And I can put them in a big room, they sound even better. So, and that's a big speaker. I don't know what the answer is for this. I mean,
let me give an answer that maybe is independent of the speaker, because I find for an audio engineer, ultimately, if you're taking your work seriously, you will have to learn how to work with the very low end, and so you won't get around eventually getting a full range system. Might be further down the line by adding a subwoofer. It might be further down the line by bigger speakers. Because mixing is primarily a mid-range thing, balancing the mid-range. If you are just starting out, it's fine to get a smaller speaker which literally just doesn't have the low end extension, and therefore cannot create the low end problems because no energy is pumped into the room at those lowest frequencies. That's fine because you need to focus on mid-range at first anyway. But your low end will be out of control in your mixes because you can't hear that stuff. You can obviously use headphones and stuff. But then once again, you actually, with the headphones, you are introducing a full range system into your workflow. And so with the headphones, you are just opting to use headphones to judge the full range of music instead of speakers. That's why I'm saying eventually you will have to move up to a full range system. And it's fine, like I said, to initially opt out of doing that, but you will eventually cross over into when you need to do that. And in many cases, that will probably be sooner rather than later, which in turn means your selection of speakers is independent of room size. when we're talking about some sort of technical relationship. I've actually made a video about this anyway. There is no acoustic relationship between speaker size and room size. There's absolutely there's no dependency there. If you make that decision to start with a smaller speaker, it is a learning decision. It is a skill learning decision, not an acoustic technical decision.
So I have noticed that most mixing / mastering engineers use speakers on a desk. So that rules out a floor stander immediately, pretty much, right? Because you're going to use a sub or two.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of that approach, mainly because a lot of audiophiles swear by floor standing loudspeakers. I'm not trying to take anything away from them, but you've got bass units in the speakers left and right, usually at the bottom of the speaker, right? So what you're committing to there is, this is the best location for those two bass units in this room. But that might not be the case. So imagine you could remove those bass units and move them around the room, both of them, right? Well, that's what a 2.2 setup would be. So I think you'd be throwing money away if you had floor standers with good bass response and then you move to outboard subs. Because then why have you got a floor stander? Why not just get a nice stand mount and then have two subs? Which is, I think, having the sub separated from the stand mount, it's much more difficult to integrate and build your own crossover, because that's what you're essentially doing, right? But you also have to integrate the bass of the room as well as with the speaker. So you've got two things to consider. That's hard, and it will take a long time to probably really dial it in. But once you've got it, as long as you don't move rooms, you're locked in to something phenomenal, which I think will be better than just having two floor standers. Now, I'm not saying that two speakers and two subs is always better than all floor standers, but I'm saying it's something to consider. That the low bass output might not be, right the left and right beneath your mid range and your tweeter.
For sure, yeah. Paul Kenyon says, with the emergence of room equalization software being built into some quality source equipment, do these software equalizers, in quotation marks, like Dirac or others, negate, to some degree or other, the need for good room shape or retro room improvements such as bass traps and diffusers, etc.?
I guess from my experience, DSP, like Dirac, like Room Perfect, are really good in the low end. And also great now at helping you integrate subs into the room and multiple subs. They're great for that. What they can't fix is reverb in the mids and the highs. Just can't do it. Because once the sound's out of the speaker, it's just ping-ponging around. Nothing can do about that. So if you've got an empty room, what I mean by empty as in like untreated room, yeah, then no DSP system is going to fix the reverb part of that problem for you.
I think it's about thinking about the strengths and weaknesses of each of these components in your speaker system, in your music playback system. And equalization software is really good at changing the tonality of your system. So that's its strength. So we might use it for that, where we can't otherwise do that. For example, because you're in a poorly shaped room. But its weakness is combating the actual decay time, the reverb of the room, including taming room resonances. You can, yes, rebalance to some extent the tonal shape, as in the spectral shape, the frequency response of these room resonances, but you can't stop them from happening, right? So that's where the strength of actual acoustic treatment lies. Its strength, if done right, it will flatten the frequency response, but its primary purpose is to damp the decay time of the room. That's its strength. So that's what we use it for. And then we can use the DSP software for its primary strength, which is changing the tonality of the system, aka equalizing the frequency response, which might be tricky in an oddly shaped room or an unoptimized room shape, even with a lot of treatment. So it's the combination of both. It's not one or the other. It's when and to what degree do we use each, and how do we combine them in the best possible way?
I think there's a problem with the promotional language of the DSP systems, because they're called room correction software.
Well, just to throw in, I always used to think that, and then I went to Sound ID to SonarWorks, and they specifically don't use that term anymore. Okay. I was quite surprised. Yeah, I was just like, we all call it that, but it's actually just us using that nomenclature, and it's at least SonarWorks. I remember distinctly not seeing it them call it.
Right, because it's not correcting your room, and I used to kind of try and bastardize it and call it room compensation software. But even that is not true. It's like partial room compensation, right? It allows you to kind of compensate the output of the speakers for certain room anomalies, but not all, right? But the thing is, the whole room correction thing, it gives newcomers the impression that I don't need to have acoustic treatments. I can just turn on this DSP and all my problems will go away. And that is no way.
I think the most accurate is probably a speaker calibration system, because that's what it ultimately does, with the goal of compensating for some of the room's deficiencies.
It's a bit of a mouthful, though, isn't it? It doesn't really roll off the tongue.
No.
Yeah. I mean, I understand.
That's probably the most accurate.
I understand the nature of marketing, obviously, and they want to convince you that this is a magic bullet. But as with everything in audio, there ain't no magic bullets. I mean, they're very effective. And room compensation software, like Dirac, like Room Perfect, like SonarWorks, is great. And it's almost like modern magic, isn't it? What it can do for us now. But it's like having like a universal medicine or a universal tablet that will fix every common cold. No, it doesn't exist.
It's called placebo. Pravin Jokun, I think that's his name, asks, what is listening to good audiophile music only for the rich? Are there other ways to have good sound quality at a low price?
So the audiophile experience, such that it exists, it isn't a matter of money. It's a matter of attitude. So if you're always somebody who's just only ever listening to music whilst doing something else, so it's the soundtrack to a primary activity, I wouldn't necessarily call you an audiophile. Unless you're really honing in on the quality of the sound while I'm on the treadmill or while I'm cooking today is great, maybe. But then you're focusing on the sound probably more than your cooking or your exercise regime, right? So if you're into listening to music as a primary activity and you're not just into the music itself and you care about the sound, even to a slight degree, even if you go, that Bluetooth speaker sounds crap, I need to get 2 speakers for proper left and right separation, even if they're only like 300, 400 euro speakers, then you're already an audiophile right there, because you've made a decision that is optimizing or improving your listening experience to the music that you love. And in fact, I think, I don't want to speak for everybody else, but there's a broad spectrum of attitudes to audiophilia, and some people, as I said right at the start, are into maximizing sound quality at all costs, even if it means listening to music that they don't. Well, maybe they love it, maybe they do. I don't know. Maybe they love it because it sounds good. It's hard to kind of separate the two, isn't it? It's like trying to extract the flour from the cake once it's baked. But I find it fascinating that people think it's a rich man's pursuit. Yes, there's a crazy amount of expensive gear in hi-fi, right? Just as there are crazy expensive cars or crazy expensive houses or crazy expensive watches. But you don't have to engage with that, right? And I think the mark of, actually, this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently. I think the mark of a proper audiophile is how you deal with something that you want but you can't afford. Right? How do you cope with that? Because some people cope with it very poorly.
Pain.
Yeah, but seriously, some people do.
Meditation.
It's about being happy with what you have. And I think the happiest audiophiles are the people that are happy with what they've got. They're not angsty about that thing that costs 10 grand, right? No matter what it is. And they'll make up all sorts of stories for themselves as to why it's not desirable to try and deal with the fear of missing out. So it can seem like it's a money game. But I haven't experienced that. Like, I mean, I've moved. I mean, I used to do a lot more affordable stuff than I do now, but I still do lots of affordable stuff. But I entertain more expensive speakers and amplifiers than I used to. But somebody asked me last year, like, would I review their 75,000 euro pair of speakers? And the answer is no. And not for the reason, not just because they're 75k, but because what am I going to compare them to? And if I've got a pair of 75k speakers, what amplifier am I going to use to drive them? It can't be some $500 integrated, because that's not what most people would use. So I need a more powerful amplifier. So now I'm in for 2 sets of speakers, 1 amp, maybe 2 amps to compare the 2 amps. It just becomes a much bigger game. And certainly from my point of view, as somebody who assesses gear, that's just too difficult. But it might, yeah. And so if you're seeing lots of expensive gear out on the internet, yeah, you might go, oh, well, hi-fi is for rich people, but it's not. And there's loads of coverage of affordable stuff. It's just people choose not to look at it, or choose to ignore it, to bolster their argument that it is a rich man's pursuit. There's never been more affordable, great sounding audio gear than now.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? It's an amazing time to be alive, to be into music. But if you want to create a boogeyman argument that people are out to kind of pull as much money from you as possible and trick you out of that money because they want to sell you €50,000 speakers, well, I don't know. That's a weird. I mean, people can do with their money whatever they want. None of your business, basically. Just wind your neck in and concentrate on you, and not get too worried about what other people are doing. I really do think this. I know it's hard because you want to look over the garden fence, right? You want to see what's going on.
I was just going to say it is a lot about looking over the garden fence, because I would flip this argument on its head and just say, are you enjoying what you're listening to? Are you able to get into enjoyment while you're listening to the music? And if you are, then your system is probably good enough, and it's probably expensive enough.
No, but that presupposes that your listening experience is not only satisfactory, but also that you as a human being are happy with what you have. You might have a great sounding system, but you might just have such a tremendous attack of FOMO because something else that you see out there on the net is twice as costly, and you imagine it to sound, I don't know, even 10% better. And that's driving you crazy, even though what you have right in front of you is fantastic, right? So you've got to love the one that you're with, essentially. But the internet makes it so easy to kind of lust after the other. It's all psychology. All of hi-fi is psychology. Sorry. It really is. It is.
I think this segues nicely into a question by Francisco Cobos.
Mm-hmm.
Francisco Cobos, I think is his name. I would love to ask John how he would split a budget in 3 main areas: acoustic treatment, loudspeakers, gears and cables.
Oh.
Loudspeakers, gears and cables.
Okay, so if you had 10 grand, 5 grand on the room, 3 grand on your speakers, 2 grand on the electronics and the cables. That's how I do it. And then I would just divide that by 2 if it was just a 5 grand room, or double it if it's a 20 grand room. So 50, 30, 20, right? That's probably how I would split it now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's assuming you can do the room treatment. I mean, I guess if you can't...
Well, you can do something for 50% of your budget.
Now, when I say you can't, I mean, it's whether your significant other or your family will allow it. I don't know. That's always a thorny one, isn't it? But just because your significant other, whoever, won't allow you to do that, doesn't mean it's not an important factor. So, I mean, mixing engineers, you have your own rooms, so you can do what you like, I would assume. Okay. So yeah, 50, 30, 20 is how I would split it. Yeah,
I think that's a good split. Paul Thompson asks, I'm just starting out in audio, and I would love an expert's opinion and strategies on how to learn my speakers, space, and headphones. Is there an established technique? What sort of exercises could I do to learn my speakers, space, and headphones?
Learn my speaker, space, and headphones. I'm not sure.
So let's come up with a strategy on. I mean, the short answer is listen to more music.
Is this about placing speakers?
No, this is about how do I learn my speakers, space, and headphones? How do I learn how they sound so that I can make better decisions?
So you want to know, like, let's say you've got a peak, I don't know, at 2K. So you're going to have to be aware of that when you're mixing.
Well, I think that's already too precise. It's more like I'm getting new speakers, moving into a new space, and I want to learn audio engineering. How can I be strategic about doing that in terms of learning these speakers and learning the space?
The first thing I would suggest is put the speakers on a desk in an empty room, untreated, and live with them, as painful as it might be, for a couple of weeks. And then put the room treatment in, which is probably how you're going to do it anyway when you move into a new space. So you get a sense of what room coloration is going on. And you're probably going to be doing a fair amount of room measurements when you're doing that acoustic treatment, I would think. So you obviously need to look at your RT60 time, the frequency response, your waterfall plot. So you'll get a sense of what the room is like naked before you treat it. But
this is very technical. Let's move it into the listening to music space.
Okay, so you're talking about, so maybe from my point of view, yeah, it's like getting to know somebody. You just have to get to know a room or a space or a pair of speakers. It takes time.
So which aspects should you focus on, and what might be some techniques to actually focus on those aspects?
I guess, oh God.
So like low end, mid range, detail,
yeah, but
that sort of stuff.
I don't want to be slicing the frequency spectrum 3 ways as many people do. Yeah, the low end it's important, but that's probably, I won't say it's the easiest to fix, but certainly the easiest to fix with DSP. So I would, it's hard. How to separate the room from the speakers? I would be listening for reverb quite a lot from play a simple track, and like a simple acoustic track, listen to that, and then play a very densely produced track and see if it's as easy to pick out the separate layers in that densely produced track as was the simple acoustic track, because that might tell you something about how the room is interfering with your listening experience. Because simple acoustic music, as I've said earlier on, it sounds pretty good. Even in a reverberant room, it will sound all right because there's not enough going on to overwhelm the brain. But there ain't no substitute for time. So you've got to sit and listen, maybe moving the speakers around every so often, every couple of days, just inch them to the left, backwards, to the right, just to see if that makes any difference. But this is why, this is coming back to me saying that when I have review samples sent to me, I need them for 3 months. I need to live with this shit, because sometimes it's just, you find out things accidentally, not with any purpose. You go, oh yeah, I'm playing that track and that does not sound good, or oh my God, that thing sounds amazing. Why is that? So then that's when you're starting to learn what these things are good at or not so good at. So I don't know. Maybe I'm not the best person to answer this question.
I think you did the best job you could. I was just going to say this is a difficult question to answer if you're not a mixing engineer.
Right.
And so maybe let me just chime in on top of what you just said. That you got to train your ear to learn what your taste actually is. So what does that mean in detail? Well, it means things like listening to music that you like, and then making, for example, a map of the soundstage. Literally drawing on paper, and this isn't going to be easy because you're trying to map something 4D time in 3D space on a 2D paper. But try and map the placement of the instruments on a piece of paper. So how and how they sit in relation to each other. For example, is the vocal in front of the snare, in front of the guitar, in front of the bass, or behind it? Are the guitars panned left or right or in the center? What about the piano, backing vocals, drums, all this stuff? The placement of the individual layers in the drum kit. Where does the kick sit in relation to the hat, in relation to the snare drum? Crashes, this sort of stuff, fills, the dynamic movement of these layers. So do they stay where they are, or do they move between the chorus and the verse? These are all things that you can pay particular attention to while you're listening to a song in order to better understand how your listening system portrays the music to you. It forces you to actively listen to the actual placement of the layers and the musical elements. And so that's one way that you can be proactive and more strategic in learning your speakers and your space. Yeah.
I would also say get an okay pair of headphones as well.
To reference to contrast what you're listening to in the speakers and
especially for the bass. Yeah. Because that's the thing that the room is really 9 times out of 10 going to mess up. And you really need to get a sense of what this track should sound like. You won't get the sound staging that you've just talked about as cleanly from a pair of headphones, but you'll get the panning. Actually, a manufacturer delivered a pair of speakers to my house in Portugal in January, and he wanted me to listen to some Roger Waters, which I kind of like. It's a bit of an audiophile cliche, so I was like, oh, do we have to? But he's like, no, this was that Q Sound album. It's Amused to Death. And the first track, there's a dog barking and there's an old shortwave radio playing. And he said, when you get your listening position correct relative to the speakers, the dog bark isn't there as you think it is when you first listen. It's actually over there. Mm-hmm. And the shortwave radio is over there. So he got me to move around until that was the case. And we moved the speakers a little bit as well. So that's an extreme case of soundstage placement. And I know it's a Q Sound thing, which doesn't exist anymore as far as I know. But it was still a good example of knowing what to listen for. And then he played me a Pearl Jam track, and he's like, okay, you need to look for Eddie Vedder's voice and point to where he is. It's like right there, just above the tweeter, right there. He's like, okay, that's pretty much how it should be. Yeah. So if you have a couple of reference points like that, yeah, I mean...
And the thing is, if you don't know those reference points going in, you don't know what you're looking for, right? So that's why I, for example, have my techniques to show people how to specifically set up your speakers in your desk in the right spot in the room, right, in order to create a baseline on which you can then learn these aspects in that detail. Yeah, and then you know for the system that you have set up in your room at that moment, this is how the music is portrayed in detail. Yeah, and it's not just about saying this is bright, this is dark, this has treble, but you're going to be able to distinctly say, to me, it sounds like the snare hits this far forward of the vocal. The movement of the vocal throughout the track happens in terms of depth from kind of midway to this far in front of the guitars. It's that kind of detail that you need to learn in order to really get to know your taste. This is, while listening to music that you obviously like, at that point you know, okay, I like this music, and in this music the vocal sits here. And then you know that this is your taste. This is how you like to have vocals sit in the mix for your personal taste, ideally. And then you can contrast that to music that you don't like so much, or mixes that you don't like so much, or rather that you know work really well, but then you realize the vocal is somewhere completely different than you would actually like it to be. And then you are consciously making the decision the next time you make a mix to place that vocal in a different spot than where you actually like it. And that's what I call learning your taste and learning to actually mix. Yeah. Another really good example is sibilance. Super fine detail, but sibilance can be dependent on the person making that noise and the microphone that is picked up with, and the position can be somewhere between sh and s and all sorts of things, and it can blend between the two, between all of these. And that's just to give a quick idea. And you need to learn which of these you like best and why, and which type of singers produce that kind of sound, so that you can then, if you're recording, capture it in the way that you like. It's that amount of fine detail that you need to go to in order to mix properly. That's what expert mixers listen to. And so, yeah, if you want to learn your space and your speakers, listen to a lot of music that you like, listen to a lot of good mixes that you know translate well, and then make a conscious map of how that sounds. And that will tell you that will basically tell you how your speakers sound in the space that you're in.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I guess I'm not listening as much I can pick out when a speaker is good at specifying where stuff sits on a soundstage, but I don't hone in to the point where I'm like, okay, it's 2 inches further forward than it was with that last pair of speakers. And that's mainly because I'm not living with speakers for as long as you would do, because you would have these for like, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years.
Decades.
Right. And I'm listening to something for like a few months, and then it's overlapping with something else. So I'm doing some comparisons. So it's like, there isn't the time I guess there just isn't the time to go that far into it, because if I was doing one review a year, yeah, okay, I'll go that far. But it's just, I've got to do something, every couple of weeks. But tonality is big for me. Dynamics is big for me. Obviously, bass reach, air, presence region, mid-range clarity. They're probably, off the top of my head, some of the qualities that I would listen for. Yeah.
So, John, I think we've spent so much time on very good questions, very good answers, but I think we need to finish this off. Okay. I think we need to find our jumping off point. Let's use this last question. Okay. And this is by Maximilian Weber, and he asked this in German, so I'm translating. He would like to know the difference between coaxial, for example, Geithain, and classic designs, ATC, etc. Which is better in the near field? But more importantly, also, why do classic designs, ATCs, for example, why are they seen as a reference speaker, but Geithain and other coaxial designs aren't?
Oh, goodness me. That's a bit of a spicy question to end with. So I guess coaxial designs, the imaging will coalesce sooner, right? So they're probably more conducive to near field. ATC don't do coaxial designs as far as I know, but they have a tremendous reputation for that mid-range driver. It's like a doped paper, isn't it?
I have no idea.
I think it is. So I think they have a stronger reputation in the mixing and mastering studio world than they do in the hi-fi space. The hi-fi space reputation is also strong, but they're seen as a small British company, which they are. I like the sound of their loudspeakers. They do a couple of actives for the home listening space, but mainly they're passives, and some of them they need a lot of power, a lot of amplifier power. I don't know why. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm stumbling on the last question, Jesko, right. As to why. What was the question?
Why aren't coaxial designs, which you said at the beginning yourself are excellent, tend to be excellent,
right?
In terms of imaging, why aren't they seen as a reference design, a reference speaker, in comparison to something like ATCs with a more classic design?
Again, because there's no magic bullet. You can't go, okay, every coax is going to trump every sort of more standard two-way. So yes, some coaxial designs will be mind-blowing for some people, like the Genelec actives. So a lot of people might like those because they're good in the near field and they've maintained a lot of clarity in the mid-range. But you might equally get that from from an ATC speaker, but it might not image as cleanly, but it might do because the implementation of the separate drivers might be on par with the other drivers in the coax design. It's all about implementation. So again, if you're asking for a general, why is this difference seen or heard? Because the implementations are different. Nobody has the kind of the go-to solution for anyone, I don't think.
Nobody has the go-to solution for anyone, I don't think. Maybe that's a good sentence to wrap up.
Yes, sorry. I'm getting hungry.
Yeah. Understandably so. John, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jesko. That was a lot of fun.
Yes.